Good morning, Cindy. Are you ready? Good morning, State Auditor and Inspector. How are you today?
I am good. I didn't think we were going to get that done. We have to worry about security here on the computers at work. And so they were trying to fix that.
I see now. Okay, that does make a lot of sense, actually. It makes perfect sense. So, what do you want to do to get started? How do you want to get started? We all have, Julia says, good morning, Cindy. Everybody's excited to have you on. We've got a nice audience, so nice live audience. So how would you like to start?
Well, what do you want to talk about?
Well, you want to start with the TPS audit because it was pretty interesting audit.
Yes, so that was a very interesting audit. Now remember, the governor is the one who requested that audit, or I would not have had the authority to conduct that audit. So the governor gave us 3 directives on that audit. One was to look into the alleged misconduct of Devin Fletcher, who at that time it was believed had misappropriated funds. The second thing was to look into some of the procurement practices of TPS. And then lastly, to look to see if the school had violated House Bill 1775, which, as you know, was the banning of teaching of critical race theory. So we started that audit, and keep in mind, Jenny, even though we put out close to 400 audits a year, these investigative audits take a lot of time. And part of that reason is because we're looking to see if anyone misappropriated funds. That's just another word for stealing or illegal activity. We have to look and see if laws were violated. And before we can put a report out, if it talks about people's actions, we've got to make sure it's correct. So those things do take time. I just want to make sure your audience understands that we are doing close to 400 other audits a year. So as we got into this audit, it took a little over 2 years to get this audit completed. Even though that wasn't the sole project these auditors were working at the time, we had to go back and forth with Tulsa Public Schools, obtaining documentation, and we did not feel like they were as cooperative as they claimed. You can see that in the email streams that we had, where we continuously had to ask for additional information, or what we received would be incomplete. So at the end of the day, whenever we put the audit out, we found that the Tulsa Public Schools had some really big issues. And I would say to your audience that gross financial mismanagement was at the very top of the list. That was a big concern. Tulsa Public Schools spent millions of dollars without complying with their own board policies for competitive bidding. We found in some instances that expenditures appeared to have been hidden from board members and buried in consent agendas. We found that there were, throughout the audit period, which was school year 2015 to school year 2023, close to $35.5 million had been spent on DEI initiatives. We also found that one of the employees, who was the director of the Bond and Energy Department, had been what appeared to be running a business out of Tulsa Public Schools, an architecture consulting business. And in his emails, we found where he was responsible for rating engineering firms who would get the contracts for the bonds that had been passed for the construction projects. And he would rate them. And one of the ones he had rated as the top engineering firm was also one that was turning back around and hiring him for consulting projects. I think we found that firm, the engineering firm, had paid this employee over $300,000. So some very concerning issues here.
Well, Kendall Sakieri was on our program, and she was talking about that particular issue itself, the fact that so many schools do that kind of a thing with their bonds. It's kind of a circular, it's its own economic stream, the way they do that.
We feel like this is a potential violation of law, and that was one of the items that we turned over to the Attorney General's office for them to look into further. If you're going to ask the public for their tax dollars for bonds to build construction projects, I mean, you really need to make sure that you are competitively bidding, that you're getting the best price for the best product, and that you're being transparent in all things that you're spending those funds on.
You use the word fraud in here numerous times, and I do know that fraud is a legal term. And so in terms of fraud, what was fraudulent with TPS? What was the actual fraud?
Well, you're not going to hear me say the word fraud. You're going to hear me say things like misappropriated funds or potential violations of law. Only a court can determine if fraud has been committed. So whenever we say fraudulent invoices, we can see that the invoices were altered or tampered in some manner. So one of the things that we did feel like was an issue, Devin Fletcher, who was the chief talent manager, I'm not sure I have his exact title correct, that was part of the misappropriation that was found that was directly related to him. So if you remember, that part of it was investigated by the FBI. He had already went to court and pled guilty to wire fraud for misappropriating $620, I think I have notes here, $620-something thousand, no, $603,000. What we found as we looked at the entire period was that number was actually $824,000, and that was perpetrated by altering invoices, and then the vendors, again, that money would come back through to Devin Fletcher.
Wow. Well, I noticed there were urban schools, human capital academy. Some of the terminology in this stuff was clearly leftist.
Well, we had a big problem with looking at many of these invoices. We looked at, I think, $37 million. That was our sample. We didn't look at 100%. That was our sample. And of great concern is that we could not determine in many cases that the school had received the goods or the services for which they were paying, because there was not enough information to determine what the school actually received. These, the contracts had vague wording. We called it word salad. Whenever the invoices were submitted, there was nothing that an accountant could look at and say, yes, the school received this, it's time to pay that bill. In fact, if some of the basic procurement practices had been in place, we don't believe that Devin Fletcher would have been able to have perpetrated his scheme. At one point, I would even point out that a Tulsa Public School employee questioned some of these invoices and why they had not been bid, but the deputy CFO at that time just said, it's okay, let's go ahead and pay it.
Okay. So Visit Vantage asks, can you talk about the role of out-of-state NGOs and related conflicts of interest with TPS staff? Because I think there are a lot of people, at least this is what I got the idea, people had read it and they have specific questions that they wanted to ask you.
Okay, so the NGOs, of course, are just non-government organizations, many times nonprofits. And the school did transfer a lot of public tax dollars into NGOs in order to provide wraparound services. We could not determine, again, this was a chief issue that we saw here. You could not determine exactly what services were being provided back to the school. Some of these websites we did feel like may have offered DEI services, but the invoices were still so vague that we could not determine what was delivered to the school. The problem with NGOs specifically, don't ever assume that a nonprofit is not making a profit. And I think we're seeing that at the federal level right now with the more that Elon Musk reveals in Doge. These nonprofits that were receiving Tulsa Public Schools tax dollars, we found that a lot of the expenses were administrative costs from what we could see. And we don't believe that information was even calculated, or I'm sorry, coded correctly in the OCAS system. Now, if you're not familiar with the OCAS system at the State Department of Education, every expenditure has to be coded so that you make sure that you're not exceeding, for Tulsa Public Schools, it was 5%, that you're not exceeding a 5% cap for administrative costs. We could clearly see that some of these expenses were not coded accurately. And of course, we recommended in the report that the State Department of Education look into that, because if so much money is being spent on administration, then we know it's not getting to the classroom with the students.
Okay, well, I don't want to step over Michael. Here's another good question. What does it take to get a forensic audit for a municipality that gives taxpayer money to an economic group that has refused transparency or open records request? They've altered documents, invoices, etc., and using taxpayer funds for private agendas, personal enrichment, and still refuses financial transparency.
So the auditor's office, the state auditor, cannot audit municipalities or school districts without a special request. So a request for that audit for those audits can come in different forms. It can come from the attorney general. It can come from the district attorney. If it's a municipality or school district, the boards or the council can ask for an audit. There's also a citizen petition request, and that requires if a citizen has an issue and they feel like an entity needs to be audited, they can come to the state auditor's office. We have the ability in law to help them formulate a petition with items to be audited. It has to be real clear items that are auditable, because sometimes we've received some really crazy requests. Once we help formulate that petition, the citizen then has 30 days to go out and get 10% of the signatures of the registered voters. At the end of the 30 days, those signatures have to be turned back in to the state auditor's office, and then they are verified by the election board secretary of the county. And if those signatures are valid and there are enough, then we immediately have authority to conduct that audit. However, remember, the entity has to pay for the audit. So if it's an entity, or if it's a citizen's petition for a school district or a city or town, they will have to pay for that audit.
The citizens.
Not the municipality. Or
oh, okay. Oh, that scared me. Holy cow.
Yeah.
All right.
No,
I got a little...
The city. Well, I have a question, Cindy, or a couple questions. I'll just work them in here. So, like with the Tulsa audit, you said the governor directed what you guys were actually going to look at, correct? Like audit. So what if you get in, because it's not like just 100% forensic audit of completely everything. Like, what if you get in there and you find other things? Are those notated or documented somewhere? Like, hey, we see there's possibly something going on here, but we're not, how do you deal with those kind of things?
If there's something else that we notice, we go back, for instance, we would go back to the governor and say, we need you to expand this request. So keep in mind that my office has to bill by the hour for these auditors, just like a CPA firm does.
Okay.
And so we only have the authority to do exactly what we're requested to do. But of course, if we ever get in here and we see something that needs to be audited, or it looks like there's something else going wrong, we're always going to go back to the entity or to the person who requested the audit, the governor, the attorney general, or district attorney, and say, we need you to expand this. And then we have the authority to go back in. If it's a citizen's petition and we are only looking at a certain few objectives and we find something, then we take it to the district attorney and say, hey, we're going to need you to jump in here and help us because we found something else. And I've never had anyone deny a request if we feel like there's a legitimate issue to go investigate further.
Yeah, good. Well, and then just another question quick on, like you said, that $35.5 million DEI cost outlay, was that like in curriculum purchased, or was it like trainings for teachers and counselors? Do you know the detail of what that actually was?
It was training and coaching, I believe, is what we found there. Now,
Wow.
I want to point out something very interesting here. So in the governor's request, the third and last request he gave us for this audit, we were to look into any potential violations of House Bill 1775 that involved the teaching of critical race theory. But what the audience needs to understand is there are also administrative rules that accompany that statute, and they carry the full weight of the law. And in that, in those administrative rules, it went a little bit further and said, if you are, that it prohibited DEI plans that incorporated certain aspects of critical race theory. So that's where we had to look at both the statute and the administrative rules for both CRT and DEI. And I think there's been some confusion as to why we were looking at the DEI aspect. But again, that was listed in the administrative rules and did carry the full weight of the law. So the 35.5 million that we found, I want to make sure everyone understands we were very careful and conservative in getting to that number. We found other things that may have been DEI, but we made sure that the only amount that was reported was what we could absolutely 100% say was related to a DEI expenditure.
Yeah. Well, and just to kind of put it in perspective, that $35.5 million number, was that a single calendar year spent at the school, or was that a time period of 10 years, or what was that?
That was the audit period, which was school year 2015 through school year 2023.
Wow.
Well, you know, one of the things that I was, when I was going through the audit this morning, my download, one of the things that's just really seems to be, and Michael and I have talked about this on the show before, one of the things that really seems to be pernicious, I'm going to use the word pernicious, about the way school boards function. Stephanie Piaster, an interior design consultant for the bond department, received $639,534 for her services between 2015 and 2023. It's these individual people that provide these odd things that have nothing to do with children learning anything that keep getting paid out of these funds that are taxpayer funds for students to learn. I mean, how do we drill down to that and figure out a way to get schools to quit spending on that? I mean,
well, you know, Jimmy, that's a good question. So there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, you've got to remember it's local control.
yeah.
The school board can restrict as much as they choose if the school board is interested in making sure that the tax dollars really get to the students in the classroom. One thing that we found with Tulsa Public Schools, even though they had a competitive bidding policy in place, the administrators would sometimes make expenditures just below the $50,000 threshold,
Yeah.
meaning that it didn't have to go before the board before the contract was signed. And then whenever the expenditures came in to be paid, they were in a consent agenda. And if board members didn't take the time to really look through those expenditures in question, it flew under the radar.
Yeah. So
this interior design contract, we found that the purchase order and the change orders were not handled properly. There was some, for lack of a better word, manipulating of the purchase orders and the change orders such that some of these expenditures ended up in the consent agenda rather than being fully put in front of board members to explain that the contract had been expanded. So, you know, again,
well, and here's what you said. TPS frequently acted outside their policy, often bypassing approved procurement processes to increase purchase order dollar amounts. Instead of placing these charge orders on the board's agenda to amend or increase previously board-approved purchase amounts, they would obtain approval for new purchase orders through the consent agenda, thereby limiting board oversight. In some instances, this process resulted in payments being issued on purchase orders with insufficient encumbrance amounts, meaning that they hadn't set aside enough money for that purchase order to even use the purchase order, and then they did it anyway. So in other words, they just flat lied to the board.
Yes, manipulated, your word of lied, you know, either way, it was hidden from the board, and it shouldn't have been. Because if this had been placed in front of the board, they would have realized that this purchase order had been increased without their approval. So those are ways that administrative staff can get around not putting things clearly in front of a board member. And if board members aren't really paying attention to these expenditures, it can be easy to hide things from them. You know, I suggested one way, or one thing that I feel very strongly about. County government is very transparent in the fact that they are publishing their minutes and all of their expenditures once a month in their local newspaper. Now, I'm not advocating that school districts spend money to publish in the newspaper all of these things, but these school districts have a website.
Yeah.
And there should be enough information that the taxpayers can see exactly what's being spent each month. And it costs no money to put the list of expenditures and the amounts on the website each month, and every taxpayer deserves that.
Yeah, I
I want to say one more thing very quickly. This audit might never have happened had it not been for the group of whistleblowers in Tulsa. Now, there were eventually 2 school board members that took it to the governor, but that community was paying attention. And there was a group of people, we never ever give out the names of whistleblowers, but the whistleblowers who did bring things to us had very good concerns, and I'm glad they were paying attention, because it has led to bringing light to this entire situation. And I hope that, just as you questioned the expenditures being hidden from board members and how do we make sure that these things aren't happening, hopefully we can continue to shed some light on this. Sorry, my energy efficient lights here at the Capitol are going off. We can continue to bring some attention to this, because that should be a law that some lawmakers should have been already trying to put forward this session, of making these expenditures transparent and making it easier for the public to know where their money's being spent. But I do want to really commend those whistleblowers for the job they did.
Well, that's kind of in that same vein. That's the next thing I was going to ask you isn't there a kind of along the line somewhere, you know, if you have a bad admin that's kind of, you know, overriding things, isn't there still a duty to report, you know, like someone that's just doing regular accounting, or, you know, sees an anomaly or something? I mean, don't they still have some kind of duty to report that to somebody?
Well, Michael, I'm going to tell you, this is a new line that I've had to start saying since I've started putting out all of these audits that have so many issues. Sadly, there are no laws in place to hold bad actors accountable for gross financial mismanagement of tax dollars.
No kidding.
Wow, that's hard to believe.
Yeah, I mean, embezzlement, of course, has a penalty, but anything stronger than that, it's going to be hard to find.
Well, that kind of goes to what Lisa said. So the AG or DA can audit whenever they want, but the citizens whose tax dollars are forcibly taken have to get petitions signed. So it just kind of seems like the same alley, you know, up the same alley with that. We have, Laurie wanted to know, is the Department of Tourism still being audited and investigated?
Well, it has been audited. That report has been written. Keep in mind that a lot of the information used in that audit was obtained through subpoenas issued by the multi-county grand jury. So I'm going to be limited to when I can put that out as to when the Attorney General's office releases it. And they will tell me how much of that documentation I can release. But we are working on that right now. I expect that to be out very soon.
Yeah. You need to hit Mary's question also,
yeah,
Jenny, because I think that's pretty important in this whole grand scheme of things. I think those people should have some liability here also.
And that's a great question. I mean, they're supposed to, it's like municipalities are, which I know about, you know, we had to, when I was mayor, you had to get an audit every year. You were bound by state law. The only problem is the town is able to get whoever they want to do the audit. So that's kind of a problem. But how is it that if you have to submit, you're a school and you have to submit an audit annually, how does that happen?
Okay, so 2 things there, and I'll answer this question, but I want to point out as well, this is why it's so important that your state auditor remain independently elected by the people, because you want the auditor accountable to the people. And there have been discussions about whether or not the governor should appoint the auditor. So I just want to throw that out there for your audience, because It is so important for the auditor to remain independent. Now then, to get to your question about audits of municipalities and how do these things work, keep in mind there are different types of audits. And so while the public thinks whenever you hear the word audit that it's a turnover every rock type of audit, that's just not true. Your school districts and your cities and towns have what's called a financial statement audit. You have to have a financial statement audit in order to receive a bond rating and to receive federal funding from the federal government. But a financial statement audit is only going to tell you the net position of the entity. It's going to tell you if your numbers are presented accurately on the financial statements. And then if there are any material financial laws. That's so high level, you're never going to hear about whether or not an entity complied with the basic laws that you as a taxpayer want to know about. That takes a forensic type audit. And so while we're doing all of these audits, I would tell you that probably 99%, the 400 audits that we perform each year are going to be more financial statement related audits than they are investigative audits. It's just a different type of audit. And
do those help at all?
I'm sorry, what?
Do they help at all, those financial statement audits?
They do help. For instance, we do a financial statement audit on county government, but the legislature has given me just a little bit more authority to do some other compliance type procedures to make sure they're following the law. You don't have that leeway in these other entities. And again, the CPA firms, I think they do a good job, and they're doing exactly what they're hired to do, a financial statement audit. So whenever you see 546 school district audits filed on my website each year, those are financial statement audits. That's all it's going to tell you, and it's not going to look at any of the things that we looked at in this forensic type audit.
So a school, any school or municipality could be forensically audited, but it would have to go through that same system. You'd have to, lobby the governor or the AG to get it, to call for it, or you'd have to do a citizen petition.
That's correct.
Okay.
Or I think you said the DA and also the board. The board can the board request an audit?
A city council or a school board can also request those audits.
Well, I mean, but then you've got a problem, because it's in my experience, it's rare that you'd have 3 out of a 5-member board that would be worried about the 2 people and call for an audit. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, usually it doesn't work that way. Usually it's the other way around. There are 1 or 2 going, like it was kind of at the TPS. A couple of them say, no, this isn't right. We need to do something about it. And everybody going, well, I vote no, to get a forensic audit. So, and somebody said something a second ago. Oh, yeah. Lori said citizens are scared to say anything. And I think that's another thing too, because then, like John says, you're labeled a troublemaker, and people, agreeing in the comments that that's kind of what ends up happening, is that you get labeled as a troublemaker. But then again, these girls and the other whistleblowers at TPS, man, they stood their ground and got that done. And I don't want to put, that was important. People need to understand that they can do what these people did.
Yes. Listen, it's not easy being the auditor. Every time I put out a new message, it's shoot the messenger, not deal with the message. It's not easy being an auditor. It's not easy calling those things out. It's hard living in the community and being the one to stand up. But I mean, guys, at the end of the day, you're either going to take control of your government and make sure it's responsive to the citizens, or you're going to let government run amok. And that's what we see at the federal level.
Yeah. Well,
so can I ask you a political question? This is just so I'm veering off of that for now. So there was a comment, and I have to tell you, I don't even, like I said, my brain is so scrambled right now. I'm trying to remember what my kids' names are, but somebody said something that really upset me. And they said, and it was about the TPS audit, and it was, well, Cindy's just doing this because she's running for another office. And it really made me aggravated, because I've known you as a person, not just as the auditor. And I mean, I can assure everybody that's not the Cindy I know. So that's a big fat that's completely wrong. But it irritated me so much. And it just seems like right now, especially, it's kind of walking a tightrope, because people are going to say something about you that isn't true just because you're running for another office.
And that's part of having your name out here and being a public figure. But you know what really helps me sleep well at night? They can log those complaints all they want, but I sure haven't seen them pointing out a line in that audit report that's incorrect. So until they want to talk about the real facts of the matter and say, I don't understand this. And by the way, my door is always open. I've said this even whenever I put out the Epic Charter Schools audit that was so hard for people to understand. My door's open. If you want to come see the facts, I'll pull the work papers up. We've got lots of documentation. I would love to explain it to you. But Jenny, I do believe that some of that confusion is coming from it, because I heard something along those lines as well. There was even a newspaper that printed an editorial that complained about the DEI part.
Mm-hmm.
I'm questioning if anyone has really studied these laws like me and my staff have, where we looked at the House Bill 1775, and then we also looked at the administrative rules that specifically said you cannot implement a DEI plan that incorporates any of those elements of CRT. So when you look at the statute as well as the administrative rules, you've got to look at that. And that's what the governor required me to audit. So again, our work papers are now being given to all those who have requested. And if anybody has questions, that's fine. But let's talk about the real facts. Let's be intelligent in our disagreements or our accusations, and let's get down to where is there really something they feel is wrong, or is that just an excuse to whitewash the entire audit?
Well, and I want to say this to people too publicly, and I'm pretty sure you'll back me up on this. So this is the audit. I printed off. It's a little teeny tiny because I was trying to save pages. It was like 85 pages. And so I was like, maybe I can get two on one sheet. But if you look at her audit, and if you have questions, and you can download this, I just downloaded it. All you do is you just Google or the internet search, TPS audit, and it comes right up. And I don't know how well you can see this because, and I'm trying to do it.
Yeah, I can't see it.
Yeah, she has all in this audit. She has taken screenshots and or copies or made copies or whatever of all of the things that she's talking about in the audit. So if she talks about the fact that there was a PO that was put out and it wasn't done properly, it's in here. A copy of it is in here. So I guess that's the thing, is I find that myself that a lot of people like to complain about things and then they don't do the research for themselves, which for them is minimal. It's just to use their piggies and type in Tulsa Public Schools, Epic Charter Schools audit. I mean, whatever it is, and it pops up. Read that before you say anything, or because that answers so many of the concerns, because her audits are unbelievably painstakingly specific. And you would know that if you didn't read it for yourself. But I have to say, Cindy, that's what I did in college, was research and write. These are so well researched and so well written and so well published and so well presented. I don't know how you could get people who would make comments, because you'd go over and above, in my opinion, to make these things.
I pulled that audit up, Jenny. So if you want me to put any specific page on the screen, I can.
No, I don't know that you have to, but I think, again, I would tell people to do that. Because it's incredible. I mean, I'm telling you. So Mary has another question
as well. The footnotes are really important in that audit report for you to get to the sources of information. But this is a good chance for me to really brag on the team I have in the auditor's office. There are a bunch of CPAs and fraud examiners here, and they could go to the out to the private side and make so much more money, but they believe in the mission of this office, and they do a tremendous job for the taxpayer. And all of that wouldn't come together without that wonderful staff that works here at the state auditor's office.
Well, and they absolutely do a great job. So Mary said at TPS, an ongoing dysfunctional financial structure included the TPS that's a good one. The TPS Foundation and the Opportunity Project, which was the intermediate. Can you please talk about those NGOs?
Well, let's talk about the Tulsa Foundation, because I think that is it can be a wonderful tool for a school trying to get more resources to this school and to the students. What we found was that the foundation was being used as a loophole. They even admitted that, and I think we put that quote in the audit, where the foundation said that they had realized there was a loophole that allowed the TPS to circumvent some of the things going before the board by the foundation paying directly for those things. I think they've tightened up their controls. I do not see a problem with the foundation. It's created by statute. It's supposed to support the operations of the school. And now that this audit's come to light, I think they are really tightening up their controls to make sure that they are meeting their mission. But whenever we talk about the Opportunity Project, that is a nonprofit. That's an NGO on the other side. It's not created by statute that TPS is using. There's nothing illegal in that structure. I do think it is. I think it's very important to note that I think the lady's name is Caroline Couch or Crouch. She's the spokesman for TPS now, an employee at TPS, used to be the executive director at the Opportunity Project. So whenever you look at all of these different individuals and NGOs and this structure, I think it raises a lot of questions about how money is being transferred back and forth. The Opportunity Project was providing wraparound services to the school. And again, sometimes it was very hard for us to understand exactly what TPS was paying them for because of vague contracts and vague invoices. And that's another one that we had concerns about, the administrative costs that, again, weren't accurately coded in the OCAS system, reporting back to the State Department of Education, making sure the school as a whole did not overspend their administrative expenses more than 5%.
So one of the things that I did, I don't know why, I think it was because it was on the last page. I didn't get the last page of the audit printed out. And on the bottom, talking about footnotes, that footnote was extremely clear and it was frustrating for me. So your footnote basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, and you direct me where I'm wrong, but in paraphrasing, it basically said, hey, we did this whole thing. We, worked like crazy to make sure that we did it as we were asked to do, but that's all we can do. We don't have the superpower of being able to go out and arrest people or, bring charges or anything like that. We did what we were asked to do because that's all we can do statutorily. We're finished with that. So here's my question, and I know it's going to be the question of everybody else that's watching, because I know so many of us are frustrated by this. We see these audits, you do these great audits, we find out what's going on, and it just seems like nothing ever happens to these people, and this just continues to go on. So I'm not sure. I don't want to put words in your mouth or box you into a corner about this, but what do we do as citizens to make sure that your work is followed up on and this doesn't continue to happen?
I don't mind talking about that at all. So I've actually had someone make a statement. She puts out all of these audits and then she never does anything about them. My role is only that of a reporter. I can report, I can bring everything to light, but I have absolutely no law enforcement authority. That has to be, the law enforcement side of this has to be taken care of by either the attorney general or the district attorney of that county. They are the only ones who can go forward and look at that. But again, just as I said earlier, sadly, there are no laws to hold bad actors accountable for the gross financial mismanagement of your tax dollars. That is a very true statement. Remember the health department scandal back in 2017 when the health department claimed they were $30 million short, and they weren't. They had hidden their state appropriations into an account commingled with federal funds, so no one understood that they really had almost a year's worth of state appropriations hidden. No consequences came from that because there were no laws on the books to hold bad actors accountable for mismanagement of funds. So you're going to have to go to two places to get any action from this audit report. If you want your lawmakers to have stiffer laws, you're going to have to lobby them and make them put some laws on the books that will hold these bad actors accountable. If you want actions for what have been reported in this report, then you're going to have to go to your attorney general or your district attorney and demand that they take some type of action. All I can do is report to you. And we take that job very seriously, by the way. That's why we put things in PowerPoints so that we can clearly explain what's going on with your tax dollars, because we know it starts there. If we can make that connection to the citizens who can hold all of government accountable, that's where we get government fixed.
Well, kind of speaking of that, making those connections from the citizen point of view, how do we as like parents in a district or taxpayers in a district or municipality, what kind of questions or open records kind of things, what kind of tools do we have to ask into the district to try to find some of these things out for ourselves? Or is there any way for us to do that?
I think open records requests are your best friend. I know that's a lot of what the whistleblowers in Tulsa School District did. They asked for open records. I don't know that they received everything they requested, but that's whenever you start putting pressure on your school board members, you start making people be more transparent. You can look at the budgets for the school district on the state auditor's website. You can go in and actually look at that information to see how they're budgeting. It takes people getting involved and really looking into the finances. If you see a school district, and this is for anybody in the audience, you see a school district sending money to a nonprofit or contracting, maybe you want to ask for a copy of the contract or how that was bid. Maybe you want to see exactly what services they're providing back to the school district to see if you feel like it's a fair and reasonable amount. Citizens have a lot more rights than what you realize. It just takes somebody stepping up and asking for those documents. And I will say this, I've heard the comments here, or I've read the comments here on your blog, and people do get entities aren't always open to being questioned. And I've experienced that in my own small town. I'm from a town of 2,000 people. I say it's where everybody knows their business and yours. I love it. I've lived there my entire life. And about 10 years ago, when our school district was going to try to issue a bond, and they were putting it before the people, I saw something in the newspaper that piqued my interest. It didn't make sense financially. So I sent my mom down to the school to ask the superintendent for the documentation so I could read it. And he ended up giving me a call, and I kept asking questions, and he finally directed me to the law firm who was going to be issuing the bonds. And I just had so many questions, and no one could really answer those questions to my satisfaction. And I mean, I was a hard no for that bond issue because I did not believe that the finances were adding up. And what had happened in that school district, they were trying to, and this is really getting into the weeds, but a school district cannot go into debt more than 10% of their net valuation. It's their bond capacity. And so what the school district was trying to do was they were trying to issue debt in their own capacity, but also issue debt through an authority, which is a debt conduit created by the city or the county so that they could expand that. And I think that's, one, it's not a sound financial practice to exceed that 10% statute that's written in the law. It's there for a safeguard for a reason. And again, I kind of got pushed back because I I looked like the person trying to prevent the school from expanding the facilities for the students, and it did need some repairs. What ended up happening in this instance, that bond did fail. No one was going to approve that. And we later issued a much smaller bond that we were able to pay off in a very timely manner and expand the facilities. And now we're looking at maybe doing another one, but we're doing things within our budget, not trying to force something that could have detrimental consequences on the taxpayers where they can't afford what's been bought. So I know that was really getting into the weeds, but even I have had to do that, and I've had pushback. And in a small community, it wasn't appreciated that it's not easy. You've just got to do what's right. Life's not easy. You've got to stand up, and if more people will stand up, we will get the finances of government back on track. And if you ever need suggestions or help, reach out to the state auditor's office. We have people who can help advise you, who can tell you what to request if you need an open records request, where you can get the information you need.
I'm glad you said that. I'm definitely clipping that one. So, but I do want to point out something that Laurie said, because there are a lot of us that are frustrated, and Laurie has a thing that's going on in her town that is a huge frustration. She's been on it for quite a while, and she said they're denied. There's no teeth for citizens when municipal councils fear losing their election. Taxpayer money's hidden. Groups deny open records requests. The DA has no interest, hasn't acknowledged the Oklahoma records request for 2 years. Same with the lieutenant governor. He hasn't acknowledged but signed the return receipt request. Help. I mean, because Laurie isn't the only one that Michael and I know of that are dealing with this same thing. Making people do the right thing is almost becoming impossible, because law is allowing them to have these lack of consequences, and they somehow know it, and they're just kind of like, well, nanny boo boo, get me if you can.
A citizen can sue for open records. I know that most citizens don't want to incur that expense, but if they sue for open records and they prevail, the entity has to pay those attorney's fees. So that is some recourse that you have.
Oh, well, there you go, Laurie. Laurie, you might have to do that. And maybe that is something that we do, the groups that are getting together that are trying to fight some of this stuff. You just pull it, like Michael. I mean, Michael, that's what you guys did. You had to pool your money to hire an attorney.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe that's what they do. Robert says the legislation needs to be better when they go handing out tax dollars as grants. I brought this up to legislation, and the response was, that's for the state auditor.
When they hand out tax dollars as grants, I would need a little bit more information on that.
Yeah.
Now, the pandemic giveaway funds, as I like to call them, those are a completely different animal. The federal government just allowed so much with those funds. I mean, we're going to be hearing about the grift and waste 10 years from now on this, I fear. But if we're talking about normal funds, then municipalities don't have a lot of money to give out. School districts don't have a lot of money to give out. But that's where you're asking for those contracts. You're asking for what that basis is. The finances are very hard. This is why government runs amok. You've really got to dig in. You've got to see what law allows that. And then if you don't like that law, bring it to legislators' attention and make them do something to change the laws. Again, we need stronger laws in Oklahoma on how our tax dollars are handled and consequences for those who do not handle them properly.
Do you have somebody in your office, or is there something that you've written down that you might be able to give to some of us that we could pass on to our legislators that would be something specific? Do you see what I'm saying? Because it's kind of hard for us to go to a legislator and say, hey, we need a law that just makes it harder for people to commit fraud. And then, it ends up going around and it's, well, I'm not sure what you're talking about. And then I'll have to get somebody on it. And then because it would seem to me that you guys who know exactly what the issues are, if you had some language, then maybe, I don't know, one of us, we could work together and get that language written down and then say, legislators, this needs to be passed. This is what we need to do here. I mean, is there anything we can do like that?
Yes, there is. And I would love to talk to you about that for just a few minutes. Last year, whenever I put out the federal single audit, and that is the audit that is a very high level review of how the state spent its federal grants in the past year. I called Oklahoma, or I said, we are becoming a no bid state. And I meant it.
Yes.
The one thing that controls expenditures is competitive bidding. That's a cornerstone of any good governance. You want to make sure you're getting the best price for the taxpayer. And what we found at OMES was that they were putting people on the state contract who had sometimes never conducted any business with the state of Oklahoma previously. They had not compared these prices to other vendors to make sure it was the best price. In fact, I believe in our report, we connected some of the dots, how it was an inside crowd who was getting some of these contracts and getting to be on state contract. If you have stronger competitive bidding laws, it will force the spending of your money to be done in such a way that it's transparent. Because if you are going to put out a contract, you're going to put out, okay, these are the exact services that I need, and I want everybody to give me their best price. When you don't have an RFP process, you get vague contracts with vague invoices, and you have no idea what you paid for, or if you paid too much, or if the vendor underperformed. It's a big problem. That is the number one thing that needs to be sharpened up in the state of Oklahoma and at all levels right now. The only level of government that has a very effective process is county government. And it's because there was a scandal in the late 70s. They rewrote all of the purchasing laws, and county government has to follow strict rules. That does not apply to schools, cities or towns, and even the state level has circumvented some of that. That's got to be changed. Do you know this? The whole issue at tourism, why we're doing the investigative audit, relates to lack of bidding. And do you know that this year there was another law put forth that would take away some of the competitive bidding requirements for tourism? Why are we continuing to dilute our competitive bidding laws if we are grandstanding on the fact that we are going to be more accountable and transparent? I can't answer that question, but I think that's a good question to ask for legislators. And I do have a list of how the competitive bidding laws have been watered down over the last 10 years.
Well,
that
if
would
you
be
can,
a good place to start putting those processes back in place and demanding better accountability.
well, let me get with you after the podcast, and then if you can send those to me, then I'll put them up on the website along with your video clips. I did want to get to this one because Mary said within the OMS audit, your team caught the misuse of $6.5 million in federal grant funds to relocate Afghan, that's right, refugees to Oklahoma, included one now indicted for planning terrorist attacks on voting places. How important is following federal funding streams that potentially work against Oklahomans?
Okay, I want to correct one thing in that statement. We could not tie anything in the $6.5 million that was spent to relocate Afghans to the one person who was indicted for the alleged terrorist attack. We know that he was an Afghan refugee, but we don't know he was Oklahoma's Afghan refugee. So I just want to make that clear. It's very important to follow these funding streams. Now, this is a whole different issue, so allow me just a couple of minutes to explain this part. Those federal funds were the emergency rental assistant grant that was initially $276 million that was sent to Oklahoma. And it was sent because the federal government closed down our state in some aspects. People lost their jobs, couldn't work. That was meant for those people who couldn't afford rent, utility, and needed basic housing stabilization services. That money was given to a nonprofit, or the largest part of it, over $200 million, was given to one nonprofit in Oklahoma City. That nonprofit then chose to go use it for Afghan relocation purposes. That was not an intended purpose of that grant. That was non-compliance, and we reported it because at that point, the state of Oklahoma should have knocked on that nonprofit's door and said, we want $6.5 million back if you spent this in for purposes that weren't allowed for this grant. The other thing that nonprofit did was last year we reported that they had taken $15 million just off the top, 10% as a management fee. That's not allowed by the grant. So whenever I say, don't be surprised if a nonprofit is making a profit, there's a good example. Now then, should you follow these funding streams to see what is happening? Absolutely. Because let me tell you, if the federal government now comes in and demands that money back, the state of Oklahoma is going to have to write a check, not the nonprofit. It will be up to the state of Oklahoma to go sue the nonprofit or make them give that money back. So ultimately, if the federal government wants that money back because it wasn't spent according to grant guidelines, it's me and you, the taxpayer, who's going to pay that back. My question is, why has the state of Oklahoma not taken immediate action on these audit reports to go get that money back? And
Well,
again,
it's like-
I'm just the reporter. I don't have any law enforcement authority.
Well, it's like Class Wallet, wasn't it? I mean, we gave all that money to Class Wallet, and then our governor said, well, we're going to get that money back. I don't know that we ever did get it back.
We will never get that money back. And I'll tell you why we will never get that money back. The state did not take care of those funds. They did not contract the way it should have been contracted to protect our interest in those federal dollars. That money was given the money never left the state of Oklahoma's bank accounts, but two actors from two different nonprofits were allowed to direct those funds in such a manner that were not consistent to what federal grant guidelines required, and so the money was spent incorrectly. But there's no recourse because there was no contract given that would have held the bad actors accountable for misuse of those funds.
So basically what it sounds like you're telling me is if you don't follow the law, you're exempt from the law.
Sadly, Jenny, I mean, you can get away with a lot in this state right now because we don't hold the bad actors accountable.
I just can't. I mean, because you and I mean, if we break the law, the hammer's going to come down like the hammer of Thor, but it just seems like these people do these things. Well, there's not a contract, so what are you going to do?
Well, here's a thought.
I mean,
an 18-year-old can go down and rob a store for $400 cash and spend 5 years in jail.
Yeah.
But bad actors in charge of millions of your taxpayer dollars can mismanage it, spend it for things that aren't even allowed, and nothing happens. And again, I'm just the reporter. I'm not the enforcement. So we've got to sharpen up some things in the state of Oklahoma. Competitive bidding will do a lot to help with that, but then we also need some laws to hold bad actors, accountable.
So let me get through a couple more things. How long do you have? Because I don't want to overstay.
For time for the interview?
Yes.
Another 15 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, so if you've got questions, everybody,
Okay.
prop them up now. Okay, economic groups claim private contractor and escape these restrictions and are given taxpayer money. There's pass-through. The pass-through arm is a shell for private enrichment, separate issues than OMS. And we've seen that ourselves, several of us who have been investigating things. The NGOs they get the money and it becomes a pass-through, but then somehow that money winds back either to the person who gave it out in the first place or to a contractor to enrich them. And I guess it's like what you said, we just got to get better laws to make that stop.
Yes, and each instance has to be investigated separately because there are different laws for different entities. So while you're asking a specific question there, I would have to go in and research those specific laws to see if anything was done incorrectly. Okay.
Well, and I got to put this one up because it's funny. It's like continuing to give your teenager more lunch money when they're spending it on beer and cigarettes.
Julie, that's a good analogy there.
Diane said which NGO, and I'm not sure because the problem with these when these come up, I'm not sure which NGO or which one we were talking about, Cindy. I don't remember.
I don't know if it was TPS or if it was one of the state nonprofits. I don't know which one we're talking about here.
I don't either. But let me put this one up because I think this is a really important one. Do you think, as Lieutenant Governor, there is a way that you can change some of this?
Well, I absolutely do. Now, I don't want to. I'm in a state building using a state computer. Here is the state auditor.
Yeah, that's probably so. Let's avoid that topic.
Yeah, let me say that any
Okay.
elected official in the state of Oklahoma has the ability to use their voice to make sure we're calling out the bad actions. I'm a CPA. I've been an auditor for 28 years.
Yeah.
I have done nothing but read Oklahoma laws to hold people accountable. That's not usually the resume that somebody has who comes into this Capitol as a legislator. So legislators don't have all of this knowledge that I've gained from being an auditor. I try to help legislators as much as possible. You know, if there's any issues there with wanting to make a law stronger, but again, you've got to have somebody who has that knowledge, who understands what's broken to be able to fix it. So anybody, the state treasurer, if they had information to help, I mean, anybody who uses their voice and brings attention to a problem and has that knowledge can help fix things. That's not answering your question directly.
No, it is. It actually is answering the question. I mean, it answered the question very well. And I was thinking kind of the same thing. So it's funny that Laurie would say that. Thank you for such poise and respect for a law. That's a strong statement in and of itself. And that was kind of what I was thinking myself. That was a really excellent answer. And the only problem is I had a really good question. I forgot about it. Give me a second. Okay, so let's go while I'm trying to think about it. What audits do you have left now on your plate?
So I have the Turnpike Authority audit. Don't get too excited about that yet. That probably will not be out until the very end of this year. It is a huge audit. Yeah. There are many different areas we're having to look into, and we're not going to put something out unless we know it is absolutely correct and we can stand on our facts. So I know a lot of people are anxiously awaiting that audit. Don't look for that until the end of the year. The tourism audit, which people have called the Swadley's Barbecue audit, that audit is ready. I mean, that audit could go in the next 2 weeks if the Attorney General's office is ready to release that. So that's really, we're fine tuning some of the wording based on their recommendations, but just as far as how much we can present that's confidential information. They don't tell us how to write our reports. We have that one ready. We are currently involved in the audit of OMES. So last year, whenever I said that Oklahoma was becoming a no-bid state, Attorney General Gettner Drummond asked my office to do an audit of OMES's procurement and contracting processes. And that is a real concern. So that's something that we're on right now as well. And again, I have a lot of municipal and a couple of other school district audits that we're working on. So those are the big audits that we have coming out this year. So we just have a lot of work to do and not as many hands as we would like. But
that's something I want to point. That's something I want to point out really fast. Somebody said something ugly about the TPS audit or something, and me had to, chime in and make them be quiet about it. But I said, look, the legislators, you're kind of like the ethics commission, because it's like the ethics commission is supposed to regulate what legislators and, other entities do, but the legislature won't fund them. I mean, the legislature hardly funds you guys. It's kind of like the ones that are really have the ability to get at where all the stuff that's screwing over Oklahoma taxpayers is happening, but they won't fund you.
Well, they've given me a little bit the last couple of years, and it has helped. I've been very grateful for it. But now we're facing a bigger issue, not just in this state, but in this country. The pipeline for accountants is broken, and there aren't a lot of people going into accounting. I tease that people don't want to do math anymore, but we're having a really hard time finding accountants. Other agencies in the state are having trouble finding accountants, so it's not just our office. It's just very difficult right now.
Really? So what's the matter? Well, I mean, how is it broken?
Well, I don't know, Jenny. There are students in college who don't want to be accountants like they used to, and we need more accountants.
That's so depressing. But it was kind of the same way, with firefighters there for a while. Nobody wanted to be a firefighter, and small towns were having, like ours, were having a terrible time finding firefighters. So, I mean, that's a tough kind of road to hoe. Okay, so Dana said, let me go back here for just a sec. Dana said, when we bring information to a legislator's attention, because of our experience, they have to be willing to listen to help with change, or at least the discussion of it, because we've talked about that on this program for numerous times. Everything at the Capitol seems to be, we have an expert. This is an expert. This is an expert. Well, you know who the experts really are. It's the people whose hands are in their pockets. That's, it's the taxpayers really on so many of these things that are experts, because they're ones finding the problems and saying, hey, this is happening to me. This is a problem. So I think that's a cultural issue. We've got to somehow make the people that we elect understand that they are our voice, because we are the experts. I mean, just a thought.
I agree with all of that, and you've got to get voters engaged. You've got to get them engaged to really research their candidates. If they're just voting for whoever had the best mailer, and those candidates aren't really knocking on your door asking for your vote, or you haven't really vetted them, then you're not going to get what you're wanting. I tell people all the time, look at a person's resume. What are they bringing to the table? Look at this like you are hiring somebody, because in fact you are. Every person you elect is hired by the people. Make sure you're looking at the resume and you know what you're getting. Look at them like you're hiring an employee. They work for you. We work for you. I work for you.
Yeah, but you really know what you're doing. So you are an expert. There's no question about that. All right. I think we've run out of questions for now. So do you have something you want to close on? I mean, anything that you're, let us have it.
I think that I said this on Flashpoint the other day. They asked me about Oklahoma Doge, and I kind of laughed, and I said, I've been in this building, now for a little over 6 years as state auditor, and everyone's always, said, stay in your lane. And now that accountability and transparency is so popular, everybody wants to be Doge. And I said, well, I was Doge before Doge was cool, but welcome to my lane anyway. I will share my lane with you, whether it be legislators or the governor who wants to create a Doge, whoever it is, welcome to my lane. Let's all get this cleaned up, and whistleblowers especially have a part in that lane.
Oh my gosh, that is so great. Okay, for the last one, you and your team do excellent work. Thank you. Wish you had magical law enforcement authority. Agree, your position must remain elected. And then Laurie says, thank you, Cindy. And I know, all of the people who are on this morning were just, we, and I'll say it again. I mean, I'll stand up for you because I know you as a person. And so people can say what they want to say, but here's my final word on the topic. She puts out stuff to rival any of the experts. And if you feel like you've got a problem with something she said and it's not in there, you come see me. I'll back down. I'm not backing down. It's in there. So, let's just make sure that we're keeping the topic what the topic is. And the topic is Cindy does the work, but that's all Cindy can do. So it's up to the rest of us to make sure that our AG, our DA, and the people around us are the ones that are following through with this. And that's really school boards. And gosh darn it, I'm going to say this one more time. Kendra Weston and I need to have having served on boards, we need to have a whole show just on boards.
Yes.
boards have got to do their jobs. I can't tell you the number of times I've served on a board and half of the people or more on the board have no idea what's going on. So, I mean, if our boards are going to fall down, then, then we've got what we got. Julia says, thank you, Cindy, from a very grateful heart for the work that you fearlessly do. So, we so appreciate you, Madam State Auditor and Inspector. And we are so glad that you took the time to speak with us. And I kind of am glad we didn't just go through the audit, because I think we really got some good questions answered here, and some things that people have had that are questions that have been even out in the public that we addressed here. And I'm really glad we did that. So thank you for taking the time to do that with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on, Jenny.
We are so grateful to have you, and we're happy to have you anytime you can be on. So, keep in touch. And if you will, like I said, let's get some of that written information and get it up on the website. So I'll catch up with you later on this afternoon or something through email, and let's see what we can do so we can publish that.
Okay, sounds great.
All right. Thank you again, Cindy. We really appreciate you very much. Bye-bye.